This podcast is a frank discussion on sexual assault. If you are in the USA for free and confidential help, please call 1-800-865-HOPE. If you are in Australia for confidential counseling and support in cases of sexual assault or abuse, please call 1-800-RESPECT. Hello and welcome to Open Stance. I am Tracey Smith, and in this episode, I am joined by Trinea Gonczar. Trinea is a former elite gymnast from Lansing, Michigan. In 2018, the world watched in anguish as Trinea stood in court and delivered a heart-wrenching victim impact statement to her abuser, the former USA Olympic gymnastics team doctor, Larry Nassar. Her statement went global within hours. Trinea was 37 years old when she first confronted the realization that she, too, was one of hundreds of victims of childhood sexual abuse at the hands of her perpetrator, Nassar. It has been recognized that Trinea is one of the earliest victims, enduring an estimated 800 treatments beginning at 6 years old. Since the trial, Trinea has joined forces with the Avalon Healing Center in Michigan as the Director of Development. Trinea features in the HBO documentary At the Heart of Gold, Inside the USA Gymnastics Scandal. In 2022, she is a guest on the Dr. Phil Show. And Trinea was honored in 2018 at the ESPYs, one of hundreds of brave survivors receiving the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. Trinea was named one of Glamour magazine's 2018 Women of the Year, and also has been featured in an NPR-produced podcast called Believed. Additionally, Trinea features in the books The Girls by Abigail Pesta and Start by Believing, Larry Nassar's Crimes, the Institutions That Enabled Him, and The Brave Women Who Stopped a Monster by John Barr and Dan Murphy. In this episode, Trinea takes us on a deeply personal and intimate journey into her life after the trial, when the international media frenzy dies down and life returns to routine. What happens next for Trinea when she is left to cope with her truth as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse? This is an exceptionally raw and emotional conversation in which Trinea shares the very human side of her trauma from childhood sexual abuse. She confronts truth, such as coping with the immense emotions of guilt and shame, and talks about finding time to heal in the throes of family life, pregnancy, motherhood, and career. Trinea opens up about the self-destructive Band-Aid fixed behaviors which can present in a survivor's life when trauma is unresolved. We hear from Trinea about the impact on her marriage and intimacy issues after assault, and listen to her encouraging and profound belief in the power of connection to help heal. It is my honor and privilege to welcome this beautiful human and fierce advocate for survivors, Trinea Gonczar, to Open Stance. Welcome, first of all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I know you're in Michigan, so it's getting late for you and you've just put your toddlers down, but just for our listeners, do you want to just give us just a little snapshot of you, where you're from, where you're living, just so we know
Sure.
Who we're talking to today?
Sure. So my name is Trinea Gonczar, and I am out of Detroit, Michigan. I'm originally from Lansing, Michigan, which is where, the ground zero was for the Larry Nassar case, the United States gymnastics sexual assault predator that, unfortunately for me, was a super close friend of mine, as well as my coach, John Geddert. And for me, really, I was born and raised in ground zero of what happened to thousands of people. I know that there's really only 500 that have been recorded or have been part of our case, but there's several hundreds of others. And I'm the Director of Development now here at Avalon Healing Center, which is a comprehensive sexual assault program in the city of Detroit. So We deal with anything and everything from a 2-week-old to a 101-year-old. We provide services that are, what people are referred to as the rape kit. But we don't only do that. We do so many other different things, whether it's advocacy work, expert witness testimony, HIV, everything you can think of that you could have when it becomes to assault, we deal with that.
And how long have you been at Avalon?
It's almost 4 years, honestly. I didn't expect to land there. I never woke up thinking I was going to work in sexual assault, but working in sexual assault fell into my lap. It was not something I woke up thinking I was going to do. It just kind of happened based on how our case went and how I started to recognize what resources were not available and how many people did not know where to go or what to do. And I was one of them. I had no idea. I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to find someone that was trauma informed, particularly dealing with survivors of sexual violence. I didn't know how to talk to my OBGYN about it. I didn't know how to talk to, I lied right straight to my mom. And then really things changed for me, obviously with my impact statement. And it was really based on his reaction to me and the words that I was saying to him. So that's kind of how my journey started. And then, there's lots of back history to being a gymnast here in the United States, being a gymnast at that gym, being a gymnast under Larry Nassar, but also, so many things that have happened to me now looking back make sense. That didn't make sense to me and what was happening to me and things I allowed and things that I was in and misunderstandings of certain behaviors or, just different things I didn't know, because it wasn't until I was 37 years old that I realized I had been sexually assaulted my entire adolescent years.
So that's when we talked about doing this episode together. That's really exactly what we came to an agreement on. And for me, I've reached out to you this past year. I've watched your story, and I've watched 156 other gymnasts go through the trial. I have a stack of Courage to Soar, Fierce, What is a Girl Worth, Start by Believing. I've done a deep dive into all of your lives from afar. And one of the most resounding things that hits me every time is this story is so much about the abuser. And when you're talking about sexual assault and rape, there tends to be, especially in your case, because it was such a global media frenzy around it, so much attention on the abuser and the perpetrator. And the survivor gets lost in that. And so today is such a special time that you've taken, because we're going to talk about you, Trinea. You're a survivor. And as you just said, you didn't even recognize your childhood abuse until you were 37. Mm-hmm. Trinea, what age did your abuse start?
I started being groomed probably about 6. I was about 6 years old. Gymnastics is an interesting sport because you either are one or you aren't one, and they can decipher that very, very early on. And in my case, we were handpicked by John Geddert to be part of his team to represent what at the time it was Great Lakes Gymnastics, which then transitioned into Twist Stars, which is what most people know. But we were Great Lakes Gymnastics, and I had a lower back and hip injury that I got bucked off a horse, and had nothing to do with gymnastics whatsoever, aside from the fact that I had a difficult time doing a straddle, which is a pretty common element, whether it's straddle jumps, whether it's a kip to the high bar, you straddle, and my hip would dislocate. And that's when I really started to see Larry, based on my treatment for my hip and my lower back. And so, it started when I was 8. I was 8 years old.
All right. And so that's really where, one of the other things I see is you are one of them. There's a handful of you ladies, women, that have this unbelievable international profile and recognition now as the face of sexual assault on the back of this trial. But what we're talking about is you. You were a girl. You were a little tiny girl, 6 years old, 7 years old.
Yeah.
And so our audience today, I think breaking it down and looking at the human side of this, where it's outside the Olympians, it's outside these elite gymnasts and these people that are at home that have never had a trial, they've never had an impact statement, they've actually never been public or even talked about their own assaults. They look at all of you as these extraordinary, courageous, brave leaders, and most of them say, I could never be like that. And so today, just breaking that down and saying, you know what, you were 7 years old, you were just like all of these young kids, boys and girls that have also experienced this horrific, sexual abuse in their life. So I think a really important place we can start is the trial ends in 2018. The abuser goes to jail for life. What happens next? What happens when the daily routine just picks up and the lights go off and the media dies down? Trinea, tell us what happens. Who you are, where you are, and you're left with this lifelong child abuse sitting in your lap in your normal life.
Right. Well, the thing about our case is that we were the first. We were the first case to really shine a light on this topic and to bring that media frenzy and to bring this attention. And so I think when people look at us as kind of this courageous bunch, really for me, when I stood in that courtroom that day, I was there for the little girls. I wasn't there for the Trinea Gonczar that showed up. I was there for the little girls because I was watching one after another 15, 14, 16-year-old girls go up and speak their truth. And I was watching the reactions out of all of that and seeing, he wasn't reacting. And at that time, I thought to myself, if he doesn't react to me, first off, he's going to get punched. I will run the bench because that's unacceptable. But second off, he's already dead. None of this matters really. Talking to him, it doesn't even matter because he's gone. And so, I hid in the back of the courtroom. I was 12 weeks pregnant. I hid in the back of the courtroom because I was more scared that I was going to vomit
from pregnancy or from fear.
Pregnant. Yeah, from being pregnant.
Right.
Because that was a really real
stuff
thing for me. Yeah, I had a garbage bin next to me. I think that they all probably, because barely showing at 12 weeks, but I was extremely nauseous and really.
Was this your first child?
This was my first
child, right? Wow.
First child, and naturally it was, in the middle of all of this. I had actually just moved back from Puerto Rico when we got pregnant, realizing in Puerto Rico that I couldn't be in Puerto Rico and be dealing with all of this. You live in a tropical island, I wasn't having the fun. I wasn't living that experience for me had been killed a little bit because I wasn't finding the joy in it that I was any longer. So I get to the courtroom and I think at that time, gosh, the Olympians are here. They're going to take all the media. I don't have to worry about anything. But what I was mostly worried about, one, was the young girls, but two was my old teammates, those ones that go back to that ground zero space. And there's not a lot of us. I mean, there's probably maybe 50 of us from that time. And my impact statement went global in a span of 2 hours. And so I was really not prepared for that because I really thought the Olympians got this. Like this, I don't even have to worry. And people might see my face locally, but there's hundreds of us. So, how many can you watch?
And what made that impact statement go global? If you've got all the Olympians there and here you are, what was so powerful about that?
Well, it's interesting because I wrote that impact statement over and over and over and over and tweaked it and changed it because of, people didn't want me to, my family didn't want me to say I love you to him. There was going to be a concern that I was maybe that was going to be misconstrued in some way. But I went up there, and I was, to be honest, terrified of Judge Aquilina. I didn't want to say her name, so I flipped. My first interaction was really, I had that moment where she had to say to me, you should probably just take a second, start over, because of my fear of her. And I said, to be honest with you, like, I'm here to talk to him. So if I could do that, if I could just talk to him, that's what I'm here to do. And I looked him in the face, and I told him the truth about how I was affected, how traumatized I was, because I was Team Larry. I was trying for so long to mentally believe that everything that he had done was in my best interest, and that we were misguided somehow, or that the doctors were going to all of a sudden come forward and say, no, this is fine, all medical, and that just didn't happen. And so I really spoke to him, to his family, how he could do this to his children, how he could do this to his wife, who was in turn our replacement trainer. That's how they met. He was our replacement trainer when she was our replacement trainer when he went to med school. And, she had big shoes to fill, and she had to do a lot of work to gain our trust. Because you don't become the Olympic team doctor because you can tape an ankle well. You become the Olympic team doctor because you can take a broken ankle and make somebody compete well and still win, but safely. So I say that because, it wasn't always bad what happened in that gym. We were good, and we were the best. And I competed on a lot of broken bones, and was able to do that and still win. And so ultimately in my gym experience, that was the goal. The goal was to win. And if you didn't win, you were shamed. And, that's a whole John Geddert piece of things that we can talk about in another space, because really looking back now, I mean, he had such a piece of this, and had he showed up in court in support of us, he could have walked away a hero. He could have walked away a real leader in the way to do things correctly. And instead we were there to fend for ourselves. And I wasn't going to let those little girls do that alone. So I wanted, and I think that at that moment, when the world was watching, his reaction to me, because he was completely hysterical, sobbing his eyes out. I think it was the first time someone was not just a patient, not just a gymnast, but was a real person in his life that was speaking to him. And I don't think was prepared for that. And, the world wasn't prepared for that, because in a sense, I almost made a monster human.
You did. Yeah. And from watching from afar, it's exactly, you watch impact statement after impact statement, and gosh, there's 7 days of them. Right. And and then nothing. And then when you watch the impact statement he crumbles, and literally he comes to life in the weirdest way. So well, it almost, I mean, you go from being like the villain, even though you are the villain, and you portray the villain, to all of a sudden people can see why maybe we were so close to him, because that process took years to get that close to him. And that trust was gained through my family, through our coaches, because there was a lot of other coaches that weren't John, that, called afterwards and said, how could I have done something? Could I have seen something? Could I have known something? And, people have this heavy guilt when, especially when you're dealing with children, of what did I miss? Could I have done something? Yeah. So that actually that ties into something we're talking about, what happens after this trial, right? And when you're back in your life. And one of the things that you hit really hard, Trinea, in that impact statement is an immense sense of guilt. Now, this is something in the many years that I've been consumed in the world of sexual assault, it's such a common thing to hear from all types of survivors, whether they're men, women, or children, parents, people around you, is the guilt and where that comes from. It's such an unjustified guilt. And yet here you are talking about guilt and what that does. So because it's such a common, immense emotion that people deal with, and it's one of those that stays longer than most, it can haunt you for a very, very long time, if not a lifetime. What was the guilt you were feeling in that time? And do you still carry any guilt, or how have you managed something so intense like that when you were 7 years old and you've had a childhood of this abuse? And how possibly can you feel guilty?
Well, I'll try not to cry in your show.
We're here to cry, actually. You should, going back, I cried this morning before this show, so.
This is probably the hardest part.
It's not really a show, though, is it?
I mean, it's the part of me that's so raw still. I think mostly as I've learned about sexual assault, most survivors think when they've been assaulted that it was just them, right?
Yep.
And in the work that I do now, I've learned that most perpetrators are serial, and that there's ones before you and there's ones after you.
Yeah.
And they do intentionally try to make it you, that you did this, you wore something, you did something. Perpetrators love to put the shame on you and the guilt on you, because it's easier for them to get away if it's something you carry, right? It's something you're report because you feel like, oh my gosh, I did this and I wore that, or I drank this, or I was here, and I did all these things. And for me, there were a lot of girls, a lot of teammates, a lot of people in my life very close to me that came to me and said, I think he's doing something to me, and I don't know if it's right. And I said, well, tell me what he's doing to you. And they said to me, what he was doing. And I said, well, he does that to me all the time. So you're okay. It's best for us because this is what I was told. And as a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, I didn't know better from that. And even if you think about it, you go to the doctor for strep throat, I get given a medicine. I get told I have strep throat. I go home, I take the medicine for the days they tell me to, because that's what I'm told, right? That's what we're all told. You do that because you trust, especially when you're in immense pain or you're sick or you're hurting, that you want to make it better. So you do these things, whether it's a pill. I mean, my God, I think about the poor girl, the ice skater at 15, like what she could have been given by so many people and just taken it because she was told to, because she thought that was supposed to be what she needed to take, whether it's a vitamin, so looking back at that experience for me, the guilt for me weighs in the particular people that told me.
Yeah.
But then also too, the ability then, had I not silenced them, that maybe a lot of others.
Yeah. Yep. So this is where you are in your life now. And this is so important that we talk about it, because these are the conversations that never happen and people live with guilt. You go on and life goes on, and yet these heavy, intense emotions stick with you. And they're the exact things, it's the exact intense feeling of guilt that will lead to the unhealthy behaviors that are going to come at us 100 miles an hour for many years if we don't tap into them now. And those are the self-destructive behaviors that the list is a mile long, whether it's addiction, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, eating disorders, cutting, abusive relationships,
insomnia, mental
anxiety.
Anxiety. Right. I mean, all of those things.
So guilt is one of those that has this undercurrent where it's so hard to talk about. When you are in your life now, this is so important because this is every survivor's life. I don't know one that hasn't talking about some sense of guilt or self-blame.
Sure.
What are you doing about, because obviously you're aware of it. So that's a huge, huge step in the right direction, but it doesn't solve the issue of it. So do you have anything in particular that you do to manage it or cope with it, live with it, or do you just let it kind of sit there for now?
You know, again, in my work, I've learned, and I repeat, that I did not choose to be assaulted. It was the perpetrator's choice to assault. And people handle trauma in such different ways that the way that I deal with trauma and the assault is very different than how somebody else is going to deal with that. But what I've learned mostly is that when survivors feel like they have someone in their corner, they're much more likely to gain the courage either to tell somebody or to face some of these things and some of these heavy weights, because in most cases it's a family member, it's a father, it's an uncle, it's an aunt, it's a babysitter, you know, and there's a lot of confusion for people when you've been assaulted because you assume you've done something to warrant that behavior. And really, you know, unless you wake up thinking, I'm going to assault somebody today, you're not a perpetrator, and the guilt shouldn't lay on you. And we carry that guilt because we don't understand certain pieces of this. And that's what I've had to come to working in this, and then also speaking out about it, is because I didn't choose to be assaulted. I never chose that. I didn't choose for the others to be assaulted. But what I did choose is to use my voice to give others an opportunity to use theirs when they're ready, if they're ever ready, even if that's writing something down or, you know, finding therapy. Because when you see that others can get through it, you get a little bit of hope that you also can get through it, because it's one of those things that will haunt you. It's like a gray cloud. Yeah. It's there's no surviving. You can survive sexual assault, but you don't beat it.
Yeah.
It's not like you beat cancer.
Yeah. It's something that it's an experience that will never go away from your life, but it's how we actually choose to deal with it that can change that experience in your mind, in your life, in your behavior. So you can take it from where you're stuck in the trauma, which is oh so common. And that's when all the unhealthy and self-destructive behaviors come in, because you're stuck on the perpetrator, you're stuck on your abuser, you're stuck in shame and guilt and all that, and you're stuck. But then when the miracle happens and that little window opens and that little light of hope comes through, however it comes to you, through music, through books, through chats like we're having today, yoga,
running.
Yes. That's
anything that makes you happy, really.
Grab onto that, right? Grab onto that. Because that's
well, and the thing is too, is the part I think that's been the most difficult for me with the healing piece is the unexpected triggers, because it's like, it's 5 steps forwards, 2 steps back. And just when I think like I've got it, you know, and then you get that trigger, and then that's really the part where I'm having to learn how to manage those pieces, because you get so far and you feel so strong, or you feel empowered, and then something happens and you didn't expect it, and it sets you back so much. And then there's a lot of shame and guilt in that. Like
you failed.
I can never do it. I'm never going to be able to make it. Now look at me. I'm back at square one. And, you know, that's square one's a great place to be, because you can then go to square 2. And
It's kind of like I fell into yoga a long time ago, and it was in a really rough patch of my own recovery process, and yoga just happened to be something that I started, but it was there for a reason. And I always remember the yoga teacher. I'd fall over all the time. I was a tennis player. I have the worst ankles from ankle sprains, right? I can't stand on one foot for a second. And I'm the only one in the class falling over all the time, the most basic thing. And he said to a class of 50 people, and I know he was talking to me, he said, every day is different. If you fall over, you're in the best place in this whole class because you get to try again. And he just kept saying stuff like that. And I went, right. And it just directly applied to the counseling I was going through and all of that, knowing that one step forward and 30 steps back in sexual assault trauma and counseling is what it feels like. But that's all right. And that was
well, nice. Even to your point with yoga, I mean, I transitioned into that too, just being a gymnast, you know, in my mind, thinking like yoga, I'm going to go into hot yoga. I'm going to be so strong, all these muscles, right? And I took a teacher training class, and my yoga teacher kept saying to me, you know, yoga isn't just about the strength. It's about the softness and being kind to yourself, that, you know, you don't always have to hold your arms up for the whole time. It's okay to bring them down for a second. And I'm looking at
Were you up like this the whole time, Trinea?
Oh, in chairs, sitting there for like, I gotta keep my arms up. And then I'm like, why am I keeping my arms up? Like, I'm physically shaking. I'm pushing myself so hard when really my body is just telling me, bring your hands down for a second. You can put them back up. You know, it's like these things that you feel like you have to be so strong in order to get through things. And sometimes, you know, some minutes, the strength is there, but that doesn't mean that it has to stay there or that it's going to always be there. It's sometimes just going back to that softness and saying, you know, it's okay to not be okay today.
Yeah. That's the, and especially in your world coming from elite gymnastics. I mean, my God, you had to be the strongest of the strongest human on the planet, really. But what it breaks down to is being vulnerable. And what the word softness is exactly the whole point of learning to be vulnerable, and knowing the strength is in our vulnerability, because from there, that's where our walls can break down, the bad walls, and new walls can come up. Maybe there's a better word for that than walls, but that's where the growth happens. But it doesn't happen unless we allow that softness to build a foundation and let that natural growth happen and strength come from that.
Well, that's what survivors do, really. I mean, survivors of any trauma, it's either, you know, and you don't choose how you handle trauma. It is programmed in your brain. It is the neurobiology, the science of the brain of trauma. You don't pick. Right? So you might think you see a car accident and you have no idea why you're laughing because it's not funny, but that's how your brain is triggered. That's a certain program, and that's your natural response to trauma, right? But you build these walls to protect yourself, and you build these shields to protect yourself because you think that that's the best way to protect yourself, is to put up that armor. And I did that for a long time, and I still do that some days because I think I just have to stay strong, but it is worth it for me sometimes to remember how I got here, because it hasn't been easy and it still is hard, and these walls are still up and they're still coming down. And, you know, some days it's real easy and some days it is really hard. And
yeah, and for you too, people have, again, for just people listening, this is something that has hit me really profoundly with your story, Trinea, is that I've seen you in the trial, and I've watched you so closely since 2016, basically 2018 and onward, where just for people listening, things that you've done, I'm just going to go from memory here, but 2018 concluded that trial. And since that time, what is it, 4 years now, you have been featured in Netflix Athlete A documentary. You have
At the Heart of Gold.
At the Heart of Gold, HBO. You have
HBO.
been at the ESPYs receiving the Arthur Ashe Courage Award.
I was giving birth during the ESPYs.
Yes, you were.
My child's name is Ashton for the Arthur Ashe Courage Award.
Amazing,
right?
right?
I was giving birth. Lucky me.
So, and then that's just half the list I've read. You've done that many interviews. You've been on Dr. Phil just last month. You haven't stopped. And then let's just take a little health pulse check here. You're a wife. You have 2 young toddlers. You run a program called the Avalon Healing Center, dealing with sexual assault survivors all day. When do you have time to heal? This is such another critical aspect to deal with, because in a very short time, only 6 years ago, did you actually even recognize that you were also a sexual abuse survivor, and dealing with now this brand new knowledge that since 6 years old, you are a sexual abuse victim survivor, but now it falls in your lap at this time in your life when you don't have 1 second to your name as a wife and a mother and a career woman. How do you possibly find time for healing? How do you do that?
It's a loaded question, really, because I'm bad at that.
I don't have any tissue.
I know.
Sorry.
No,
the old shirt today.
I'm so sorry too. I really, I've come a long way, and not much at this stage. After all of the speaking I've done, I've gotten to a point where I'm actually really good at speaking without crying. But that particular piece about the guilt and the girls that I silenced, will always, I think, live in me. I have found laying on my floor in the bathroom at night when both kids are asleep and looking at Amazon is a form of self-care.
Like shopping, you mean? Amazon shopping?
Shopping, awesome. Amazon shopping.
Yeah.
I mean, I buy, and it's like stupid things. It's not even like I'm trying to spend money just to spend money. I just don't have time to go shopping. Yeah. And it's easier for me to just get the things I need to get at 1 a.m. when my child just woke up, and I'm trying to, my husband got me a inflatable hot tub from Costco. Because I get severe migraines and, the tension, and I do get massages, but I'm really trying to get back into yoga. I write. Writing has become a really therapeutic space for me. I didn't realize people really love my writing. I don't know if you've ever read anything that I've written, but
almost all of it.
Almost all of it. But people find that my writing is therapeutic for them, because it, not only tells my story as far as how I am just the same normal girl that could be any neighbor, could be any sister, could be any cousin. But I also recognize that it's going to take the work from me to put myself first. And I know that one major trauma response that is a result of sexual assault is to work harder. And I find myself pushing myself to the brink of complete exhaustion and panic attacks because I'm not forcing myself to take those minutes of self-care. And, my husband will yell at me like, you cannot be up at 1 a.m. I'm like, listen, my friend, I was up with our baby. My breasts are hurting and I need some Amazon. Yeah. And he's like, Amazon it up, babe. Amazon it up, because it's like I get this window and I lay on the bathroom floor. It's like that simple. It's not even anything. It's just I lay there. I have this thing under my head and I look at Amazon and just to try to be normal, like a normal shopping person, a normal regular person that looks at normal things like new toothbrush, things like that. But the writing pieces become really therapeutic because I find I write what's happening in my mind and then I can go back and read it. And I didn't even realize some of those things I was thinking because they're going so fast.
Yeah. I love that because it doesn't have to be some complex type of healing that we go through. And for most people that are actually still in denial, maybe they don't even know, like you were sexually abused. Maybe they're in that time. Maybe they're just acknowledging it for the first time. Maybe it's 20 years down the track and they still, there's so many obvious, not one sexual assault will ever be the same for everybody, but finding, and like you said, just tying this together, the work has to come from us. There's no way around it. If you are a sexual abuse survivor, we have the responsibility to do the work. And it takes wanting to live, and it takes knowing that, believing that you're worth it. There's two components that I pray that every survivor reaches that moment at some stage in their life, because from there, if you believe you're worth it and you deserve to live, you want to live, you can work hard and work through it and rise above it and move and get healing. But breaking it down to those very basic things of self-care, which can be the stepping stones to maybe that belief that you don't have at the time, or just if you have it, how do you take a step? Journaling. How well do you know Rachel Den Hollander?
Well,
yes. So Rachel is one of those amazing, strong voices that we've seen at the front of the Nassar abuse scandal. And in her book, it's such a lovely personal look at Rachel, which, again, unless you read this book, Rachel, What is a Girl Worth by Rachel Den Hollander. And I'm reading it so slowly because every word matters to me in this book. And I'm really going through the part where she talks about her journaling. And it was at a time before the trial, and she didn't know what to do with it. Her life was crumbling and she was thrashing inside, and you could just see the volcano was ready to erupt and she didn't know where to go. And she turned to journaling. And what you're talking about is what a wonderful thing to offer survivors as a way to, if you're scared to death to talk about it and not ready, take a pencil and a paper and maybe give that a shot.
Well, and even bullet points, like,
what do you do? What kind of writing?
As possible. Yeah. Like, you don't even have to write. Like, I mean, I write, I write my story just because I keep remembering things, but I also bullet point things that I want to go back to, that I am exhausted. I can't even think about it today. So I just bullet point things, like, don't forget I wanted to think about that. And then I can go back in and journal about that. But, I think too, the other thing I've seen just with survivors is that it's easy to fall into those toxic
behaviors.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into those because they do numb, but they're a Band-Aid. They don't get you past anything. They just Band-Aid the time. And the real goal is to take your power back and to not let the perpetrator win. And the only way for you to do that is to be able to go into a place that you can be safely, healthy, and know that you deserve to live the rest of your life knowing that this wasn't your fault.
That one gets me. And so many people are stuck there. This is something I'd like to talk about today as well. And it makes sense now. Shifting the focus from the perpetrator to yourself. And you can't take back what happened to you, but focusing on those good things and recognizing that if we slide back into silence, or denial or whatever it may be, or pushing it away, thinking that time will just fade it out and erase it, knowing that's not ever going to happen. And these really super unhealthy, self-destructive behaviors, they do rise up. And a lot of times you just start working on those, whether you have an addiction or that, and you start going to get help. And yet you don't even realize that your core issue, it's all stemming from the sexual abuse and the assault. So staying present with it. And again, this is in your life, how busy you are. How do people, just making sure that you can find that safe place to keep your finger on the pulse of it, tap in, and whether you're writing about it or in yoga, feeling the balance or listening to music or reading about it, whatever. But making sure it doesn't slide into silence where that pressure is only just going to build and build, and it will come back to haunt us at some stage.
Definitely. Well, and your body keeps score.
Yeah.
And even if you don't realize you were assaulted and you let certain things happen, or you didn't understand why certain things happened, but you let them happen and you're confused, your body still knows you were assaulted, even if your brain doesn't want you to know. And at some time those are going to creep up, and you just want to be able to know that there are others out there that are going to stand with you. And I feel like that's where I've gotten from my own particular experience, is that the most people are coming to me and saying, thank you so much. Can you come stand with me? Or can you just share this time with me? And absolutely, I am here for that. Like I find nothing stronger than solidarity, because there isn't a single person in my life, not anyone, that I don't know that someone has a me too, or a he too, or a we too, or a she too. There's no person in my life that doesn't have some form or friend or experience in sexual assault. And when you don't feel alone, and you can have a community and people that will stand there with you, you gain friends, you gain allies, and you gain strength. And that's like what for me has happened, because it's not just with my sister survivors. I know that it's an isolated situation, but with the community that I work with, seeing the resilience of some of these survivors gives me the reminder of, they're going to stand here with me because I'm going to have a bad day. I mean, I just had one of my advocates last week, and maybe I'm like a floor laying girl. I don't know what that is, but she laid on the floor with me in the hall, and we just stood at the ceiling, and like, we can't even comprehend what the day is. So she just laid right on the floor with me. We just laid there.
Yeah.
And, having somebody that just sees you and in solidarity, and maybe you don't have that person in your life right now, and maybe you're not ready to tell somebody, but when you are, if the first person you tell doesn't believe you or doesn't do what you need, tell the second. If that person doesn't do it, tell the third, because I guarantee you somewhere along the line, you're going to find somebody that's going to lay on the floor with you. And there's no better place than to just have somebody that's just going to just be.
Yeah. We
don't have to talk about it. We don't have to write about it. We don't have to do anything about it, but be just together. Solidarity.
Yeah. That's support. Doing the hard work is, you don't wish it on anyone, but the fact is we have to do the hard work. But knowing, and this goes back to a little bit where we started, those support systems and those connections that are out there now. And I know when I was 19 years old, we didn't have the internet. So it was like a black hole for me. Not only did I know nothing about sexual assault at 19, I also knew nothing. I didn't know where to go, right? So when you talk about people now that don't have that support system, it's really critical that we are here today, sharing organizations like Avalon Healing and finding every opportunity to get these organizations recognized and accessible to people that don't have sexual assault in their life. They will know somebody that needs this organization. We now have just countless extraordinary organizations all over the US and actually all over the world that support survivors of sexual abuse. You have all of the videos that you can go in the privacy of your home to just listen to people. There are books written on it now. So it's an amazing thing to know that, okay, the work is going to be really brutal and you cannot sugarcoat that, but knowing you don't have to be alone. and knowing there are people that are just out here waiting to help you rise up. And I just love that for you. I know your own job is going to be very tough and challenging at times, I'm sure, but it's also a way you stay extremely connected for your own health.
Well, and it's a reminder why I have to stay in the light and why I have to stay in the hope. Because when we go to the darkness and we go to the dark side of that and we lose the hope, they win. And I don't want to let them win. And if I can help somebody stay in the light or find the hope or bring more centers or, you know, be a resource or even explain to somebody what are the best things to do if you've been assaulted. Don't use paper or plastic bags. Put your clothes in paper bags. I didn't know those things. Or,
wait, you know, what was that again? What was that?
If you've been assaulted and you're within the 72-hour window to be able to get a rape kit done, an assault kit, put your clothes, all of your clothes, every single ounce of your clothes, in a paper bag, not a plastic bag.
Why? Why is that?
Because of the mold and any kind of DNA gets changed based on the plastic consuming the DNA versus a paper bag. Who knew?
And what if you don't have a paper bag? What do you do?
I would say probably just put it in a box.
Right.
Or something that's
cardboard.
Open. Yeah, open. Something open. If you have a plastic bag, just leave it open. Don't tie it.
Wow.
You know.
And that helps with keeping the DNA from getting corroborated, or whatever the word is. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. You really want that to be as strong. You really want that to be strong. And you know, even just little tips of, you know, for those out there that maybe have somebody come to you and say something happened to me, how do you respond?
Yeah, how do you? Let's talk about that. That's huge, and I've just run into that literally last week. And 21-year-old girl told her mom that she had been sexually assaulted, and the response was not ideal. So, what would you say, Trinea, if this is so important for people that have a survivor in their life? What do you do?
I think it's a huge fear. It's a huge fear that people have of when we talk about sexual assault is being approached by a survivor that's going to disclose that. And it doesn't, first off, you do not have to have the answers. Listening is your absolute #1 best tool. My best advice is to say thank you for sharing that with me. I believe you, first and foremost, and giving them back their power by saying not what you think that they should do, but asking them, what do you want me to do from this? Do you want me to call the police? Do you want me to call your parent? Do you just want me to listen? I'm here to listen. Do we need to talk about this tomorrow? We can talk about this tomorrow. I'm here for you. I believe you. And, you know, thank you for sharing that with me because I'm here for you.
And it's really important. I want to be careful how I said that. The mom's response was not ideal. That was nothing to the mother, because no one is prepared to hear those words from someone else, that they are a victim of sexual assault. That's right. And there's nothing more horrifying, probably. So no one's equipped in how to answer that question or to handle that situation if you haven't had a little conversation like this.
I mean, hearing just that is going to give people a tool.
Yes.
A simple, you know, dialogue, verbiage of what to do if somebody were to disclose to them.
And
because that one person, that first person, can literally make or break somebody's next steps to
that's right.
Going forward. And it's not that we want to report. We don't, you know, criminal justice can be a troubling space too for survivors, but reporting simply to get the perpetrator off the streets, because they're serial. They didn't wake up today thinking, I'm just going to assault you. There's ones before and there will be ones after. So when people start understanding that it's not just me, And if I can help prevent somebody else, that's when people start getting that desire that eagerness to stop these perpetrators.
It validates your own story too, because so many times as a survivor, there is that part of the brain that just puts you in the alone box straight away. You think you're the only one. It's never happened to anybody else. This is so shameful. What the hell am I going to do? But when you have any knowledge that somebody else has been a victim or a survivor of somebody, it builds that fire inside, just piece by piece, that, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And like you said, eventually you pray to get to that point where you've got enough strength to say, yeah, now we got to talk about this and move forward. Now, there is a guy that comes up all the time. He's an attorney from California. His name is John Manley. Do you know John?
I do.
Yeah, so John's represented many of the survivors in the Larry Nassar case, many of the former gymnasts. And I'm going to find this little bit I came across in Athlete A, actually, the Netflix. He was interviewed there quite a bit, and he featured in that. I'm just going to read a quote from him, which I'd just like to touch on towards the end of our chat here, but I think it's an important one when we're talking about childhood sexual abuse. And John says, when you take the ability to love and express love from somebody and take it away or damage it, it profoundly affects their psyche. And at the end of the day, that's really what he did. He stole that part of them, and they're all struggling to get it back. And what he's talking about here, Trinea, is all of you young girls were having probably your first sexual experience at the age of 6, 7, children, preteens, and teens. And when you talk to survivors of childhood abuse around the world, where does this sit with you? You were 6 years old, and you've had to now look at this part of your life from the intimate aspect, and you've gone on to have relationships in marriage and childbirth and pregnancy and all that. So what piece of the healing is this for you, or has it even come up?
It's definitely come up. I was extremely terrified to give birth because I was told it was going to be a very difficult process for me based on my injuries, and that it was lucky that I got pregnant. I found many relationships I was in sexually. I did things that I didn't want to do because I thought I should be doing things that I didn't want to do. And, looking back at my 20-year-old self, a lot of those behaviors, again, I just thought maybe I was broken, but I didn't have any idea why I was broken or why I accepted certain things. And, as a 37-year-old woman at the time, when this came out, I was already pregnant or going into pregnancy. And, my husband and I have had to go through extensive therapy as a marriage based on this particular topic, because there are some days that I just can't get out of my head. And I feel heavy, horrible guilt being a wife and feeling like I'm performing an act for him because he has nothing to do with this. And he has this side of him too, where he says, I love you. I'm not here for the act. I want to love you. Yeah. And I'm going to be here. And if you don't feel good about this, we don't have to do this. And I'm like, but I need you to get me pregnant, right now. I'm on fertile windows here, my friend. And yeah, and you know, it's, I will say, it is possible. It goes in cycles. Sometimes are wonderful. Sometimes I'm very present. My husband knows. And other times he says, we don't have to do this. Like, you are not an object. You are my wife and the mother of my children. And I know you've been through this. I haven't been through it, so I can't express, how that must feel for you, but you do not have to do that. We do not have to do this. This is not about me. This is about us. And so, we've gone through a lot, and there's a lot out there for sexual therapy. There's a lot out there for surviving after a sexual assault and being able to be sexually intimate and have relationships that are, intimacy and OBGYN. We are working right now with a practice for OBGYN to be trauma informed, because the majority of them in such an intimate space, these women go in for pregnancy or follow-up care or, just an annual, and they have no idea that they've been assaulted. And the providers don't know how to handle if they do get a disclosure. So there's just so many different pieces. And the thing is this opened up a can of worms, a billion can of worms of so many ways and places that need to be addressed that haven't been. And healthy sexual relationships, totally a topic that we need to be talking about. And again,
it's so sexual, everything's taboo about sex still in life.
It's
so hard. So here we are.
Well,
now we're talking about
sex
and sexual assault. Yeah.
Because my healthy relationship sexually might be completely different for somebody else that's a sexual healthy relationship between whoever they're having a sexual relationship with. And either of those are okay as long as the person is okay and the people are okay. Did you find it was hard to find a therapist or counseling
specific to this sexual assault, intimacy, and all those? Did you go specifically for these issues?
No. I went for marriage, and as marriage has pieces of that being intimate relationship pieces, there were conversations about that, because the questions were to Justin, my husband, how is he handling having to watch me go through this, having to be my cheerleader, having to be my husband, having to be my best friend, having to be my partner, and then also still having to be himself. And, those were questions he had been asked, but also questions I hadn't thought of about him, that I would so focus on what I'm going through and what it felt like for me, that it was so difficult for me because I didn't know that he was so worried about me during all of these experiences sexually. I had no idea, because he was so afraid to talk to me about it. And this therapist is, that's not our focus as much, but it is a focus.
Sure.
It's one of the pillars.
And then, because you actually work at a sexual assault organization, there's all kinds of, say, teenagers and young adults that are not married yet, but
Sure.
They are dating and having sexual relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, the sexual assault in their life is buried and they haven't dealt with it. So it's all just sitting in there.
Yeah.
This is a really good time to talk to that. And what is something that we can bring to attention where we say, if you keep it buried, or is this a good time in your life do you ask them to go get therapy or counseling when they're just living their life and working and they haven't even dealt with sexual assault? Or because it rears its head and it's going to come up. And then if it lands in the middle of a marriage, it's not an easy thing to handle.
Mm-hmm.
But you've been around lots of women that were abused as children, all of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then what? Where do you go from there when these were their first sexual experiences?
Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to those healthy choices and those healthy outlets. If you are finding that your sexual experiences are not healthy, those are going to fall in line of the things that are only going to be the band-aids, and those band-aids are always just going to be band-aids. They're never going to be supporting tools to help you get better. So if you're using sex, which most do, as a mechanism of shutting out that happened to you sexually, it's okay to step away from that for a time being. It's okay that happened. It's okay that you were using that tool. It's okay. But it's also okay to say that I want something else, and I want more, and I want it to be for the right reasons, and I want to do it differently than how I've been doing it. Yeah. And I think that that's a real process that you go through. You have to go through yourself, because it's such a private place in everybody's space. So it's not something that you're going to share necessarily if you're extremely promiscuous and out there and having, very casual sex often with people and unprotected, and, putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
And using it as a mechanism of just, isolation or satisfaction. I can't think about it. Satisfaction. If you're using it as a form of what you think is going to make you happy, in the end, we all know that you're walking away, that it's not making you happy, and you're probably feeling worse about yourself. So don't feel like you have to continue that. And don't feel like you have to shame yourself because of that. Because really, everything circles, and you have an opportunity to walk away from that pattern.
Yeah. We have covered a lot today. That's really heavy stuff. And I'm fortunately, Trinea, we've agreed on 3 parts with you, because there's so much to your story, and you have so much to offer, so much to share that is so incredibly needed in this world, that we're going to organize your episodes into 3 parts. So this is part 1, which just getting the real human side of who you are, and talking to survivors straight up, and families and people that have a survivor in their life. So this will be a nice place to wrap it up today. And I feel good about that, because we get to come back again and do this again.
Yes. More to come.
Pardon?
More to come.
More to come. So I just want to thank you for doing this. I know you have so much in your own life. You're healing. You're right in the middle of it. And I know it's tough for you, but what you're able to do and share is profoundly helping so many people. So thanks very much for taking your time tonight to do this.
Well, thank you for having me. Honestly, if I help one person, I've done my job.